So you're standing at the what right now, Kat?
Yeah, just a little bit outside of it. There's a bunch of monks here, but none of them speak English. I went up to nearly all of them and said, "Swati ka," and you speak English. So they just point me to the abbot's door, and
Uh-huh.
the abbot's there, but you have to call him. It's kind of funny. Like his number's at his door, but you don't just you don't just go and talk to him. You have to call him first. I thought that was kind of funny, so I have to kind of wait.
Actually, that's kind of the tradition.
Oh, really? I thought that was
Yes.
like I never came across that so far. Anyway.
Well, not in the sense of the phone,
Hmm.
because the Buddha didn't have a telephone. But getting to see the abbot or the head dude is not easy to do. That's not even true in corporations, that you got to go through the secretary first or whatever. And so having that kind of shield um, is uh, quite quite typical. That in fact, there's a lot of Zen stories and other places where that point is um, worked on or introduced. I think that I've told you the story about the old Zen master who lived on the second floor of a building, his room, and he could sit there at the window and look out to see people coming, and he would judge based upon their behavior whether he was even going to answer the door or let them in or not. And the joke about it is that if they just walked in taking their shoes off, see in Thailand, many of the people, especially if someone's in a hurry, will kind of kick their shoes off and let them just roll wherever they are, someplace in front of the door. But this particular story is about that if the student didn't place his shoes properly, side by side, in the right place exactly, then he was not ever let in. And so I've known that story for many, many years, and I've always adhered to it. That whenever I take the slippers off or the shoes off, I always put them together, side by side, like they were supposed to be, rather than one over here and one over there, um, upside down or whatever like that. So it's actually a practice or a point of mindfulness. And that if the student is not mindful, then they're not really ready to go visit their teacher. That you have to pay attention. And many of the teachers will know that and put up some sort of guard or some sort of uh, step that somebody has to make, that they're not really easy to see. Uh, and that's actually quite typical. If you understand that there are hoops to jump through, then you'll be mindful of those hoops and happily jump through them, and then everything works out really well. So I congratulate you, Kat, for getting that number. So that's the way to approach the abbot, is by calling him and requesting um, that he be available to talk to you. You can possibly make an appointment at a certain time so he'll know when you're coming. Uh,
I mean his number is printed on his door, like you just walk up and you can't like go into the door. You just take, I guess, either call him on the spot. But I just took a picture of the number. But
huh.
yeah, it is a gateway, I suppose. Like I guess if someone really wants to see him, they'll call him, and then we'll talk.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Just like if you want to stay at the Wat, you kind of have to do something uh, to kind of get in. You have to go and talk to the abbot and all of that kind of stuff um, to get residence. That was kind of funny because I didn't know about that at all when I was in India, and I didn't know it at all when I came to watch Suan Mok. That in fact, it was exactly the opposite because, as I've told the story, that when I got to watch Suan Mok, the huge Wat that it is, Achan Po was standing at the front gate waiting for me. And I found that it's extraordinarily magical until I found out that he had seen me on the road coming from Shumpon, and he figured that there was only one place that I was going. And so he saw me kind of pass that little test before I even knew that I was being tested. So anybody who listens to that recognize that there's kind of a protocol or a little step or whatever like that that one goes through. That in the West, it would be that if you go to a Wat with white clothing on, shaved, shorn, all of this, then that's kind of a test, because a lot of Westerners will just be tourists. They'll just dress anyway and, just go like they're a tourist. And the abbots and the people in the Wat can see that you're not ready. And so they'll treat you like a tourist. So, if you go to visit a Wat, it's always best to be dressed for it, because there's you could say that it's under the point of people are judged by their first appearance, and the answer, there's always the point of don't judge a book by its cover. Well, of course we judge a book by its cover. Of course we do. The cover actually is the presentation of the book. And those first impressions are extremely important, and we all use them all the time. And so if you're aware, if you're mindful of the first impressions that you make on people, then you're ahead of the game, because most people are not even paying attention to how they present themselves. So Amit has asked a question about Nibbana. And it's an important point, but it is generally not what people think. That the Western mindset has actually borrowed a misconception from many of the Asians. Many Asians also have the concept that Nibbana is a big deal. It's important, to where it's really just a description. And yet, just like the word arahat and enlightenment, and even the word dukkha, we put way up high on a shelf, up there the way that Christians put their plastic Jesus, high up on the shelf. Well, hello, Scott.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Today we're talking about Nibbana.
Oh, cool. Good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, cool. You already know that that's in fact what Nibbana means. It means to be cool. Now,
Scott just realized what he said.
Yeah.
yeah.
It took me a second. Yeah.
that in fact we make a lot of heat. When we are afraid, we're making heat. When we're angry, we make a lot of heat. When we're worried, we make heat. When we're in doubt, we mull things over. That's making heat. Just like a car that's out on the road in transportation, the tires get hot. Why? Because there's friction. And so one of the main places where us humans get friction from is by rubbing up against our own set of rules, our own supposed to be's, our own how's is this supposed to work. Well, hello, Anna. Good to see you. So, in this conversation about Nibbana, what we're really looking at is that we have to stop making the heat. And the right way to do that is to remember to stop making heat. That whatever we're doing that makes heat, we can improve upon that. And when we do, things cool off. That's a very simple concept. is just to cool off. But there's an important point is that we often forget. In fact, we always forget at just the wrong time. The time when we need to cool off most is when we're really hot. This is why the Buddha mentions and talks about seclusion or getting away from it. In fact, someone just recently this week had posted a talk that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa made about seclusion, about how powerful and important it is to be able to be in seclusion. Why? Because so much of the friction and so much of the heat is just automatically not there when we're in seclusion. All of the problems of the world, all of the heat, all of the anxiety, and all of that is not there present from the outside influences, and that the only heat that we will have is inside of our own mind. And that's why it's good to practice when we're out alone, so that we can get kind of make it easy. Make it easy to practice. Just like somebody who goes to a gym the first time doesn't get to pick up very heavy dumbbells or barbells. That's not the right way to practice. The way to practice is to get small weights and practice with them just a little bit of time and do a whole lot of repetitions. That in fact, all training has to be done in a way that's very simple. And so in martial arts, we slow things down and we put in the work to get the form correct. And then when we get our forms correct, then we can take the forms off. One of the examples would be like when they pour cement. You know, you've seen these great big cement trunks that's got wet cement, and they come and pour them. Where they don't just pour it out on the ground, they pour it into a mold or pour it into a form. And then when the concrete is set, they take the forms off. That's true. You know that, right? So when they take the forms off, only after the concrete is set. Until then, we need forms and structures. And so one of the kinds of forms or structures that we use in Buddhism would be the form that is called sila, or morality, that we have to start someplace. And the Buddha also starts with the issue of being alone, to get in seclusion, so that you can get your forms straightened out. And then we eventually, through skill development, will harden into something that you could think of. In fact, wet concrete can be a victim to people walking into it. There are many pieces or places where you'll see dog paws, dog prints on the cement that's hardened into place because the form wasn't protected well so that the cement would harden correctly. There's also, by the way, a piece of cement that's in outside the church in Dillon, South Carolina, that still has a motorcycle print on it. I know because I know who did it. And that print was there for many, many years because the cement was wet. And so that's what happens when we're children, is that we're kind of still wet. We're not formed yet. And that's when we get impressions. And then those impressions eventually harden and form. And what we need to do is to actually, in a way, stay liquid then and have some new forms so that we can get set in the correct way. And so this is why we go off into seclusion, so that we can get things fixed and straight. And then we take the forms off. So this is actually part of the talk about why does Sila and then Samadhi and then Panya, why is that taught to the new students when what we teach here is the supramundane, which means that we've already got enough Sila. Now what we need to do is to start with the wisdom and get things even better. So we're putting a new kind of form on it, and that new kind of form is what we would call wholesome thoughts. That the mind is the forerunner, and the mind is pretty fluid, and people get really stuck and set in their ways, which are often not formed well. And so what we're going to do is to go through a reformation process so that we conform to something that's much more wholesome. And when we start to do that, we can cool off, set, and be in a better position altogether. And this is where the concept of nibbana comes in, is can we stay in the form long enough to set, to settle in. And this is what nibbana is really all about. It has that quality of being in a state where we're not rubbing up against things. So when we get our forms right, by practicing when it's really easy, then we can practice when things get tough. Because when things get tough is when we get hot, because we don't like what's going on. And in that regard, what we could say then is that nibbana comes only when we're in tough situations, that we have to practice and get our form correctly so that then we can be tested. Just like when a sword or a piece of steel is being made, you get it hot in order to form it, but then we quench it in water in order to temper it. And so we live a life of being hot a lot. And that's the time to actually make the forms to conform or to change. So what I'm getting down to is the statement that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa made is that when you're sick, that's a good time to practice. When you're under stress, that's a good time to practice. When you're out there in the world and the world is knocking you around and shoving you around, that's the time to practice. That's when the skills will be developed. Now we start with seclusion. We start with sila. We start with getting our mind to where we can get it into a wholesome state over and over and over and over again when it's easy to do, so that when the going gets tough, we can then practice doing that again. So just like the guy who is in the gym for the first time, he starts doing a lot of reps and he starts building those muscles. Now he can move to heavier weights and handle them comfortably. But the whole point also about the weights is that people are always wanting to test their limits. And so this is a good thing too, is to put yourself under the test. That there is no reason for people to stay in seclusion for a long, long time. But if you do, you'll get really, really stable, really, really cool. But then you want to stay in seclusion because you're not able to handle the heat that comes when we're no longer in seclusion. And so the right way to practice that then is to see every opportunity as an opportunity to practice. And I've heard so many students say, oh, well, I was sick, and so I didn't call you. And my answer is, oh, when you're sick, that's the time to practice. That's the time to call. Or when somebody says, "Oh, I've been really busy lately and I haven't had time to call." The answer to that is, oh, when you get really busy, you need to stop being busy. That when you're busy, that's a good time to call me. When you get busy, that's a good time to start practicing not being busy, because busy is heat. How can we practice when we're busy being cool? The answer is yes. That's exactly what we're going to start practicing. Is when the going gets tough, that's the time to get cool, to just settle down, make things really, really easy. So, how can we do that? Well, if we can do it when going is easy because we're in seclusion, and we can get the mind in a really nice, easy state. Then when we go out, or we get sick, or we've got business to do, can we actually practice then too? So that we can actually, well, hello, Carl. Good to see you. So we learn to practice when it's easy, and then we're ready to practice when it's hard to practice. That when it's hard to practice, that's the time that we need to practice the most. That's the time to really build the skill of being able to stay cool and stay calm no matter what's happening in the world. An example of that would be you're driving the car and you have a flat tire. Most people will hate it that they've got a flat tire. How many of you can actually enjoy fixing a flat tire? Yeah, you've got the strength to do that. Yeah, you know how to change a tire. Scott, do you know how to change a tire?
No, I just have a AAA. I usually just call AAA and they'll do it. Yeah.
I come from a different generation. I
uh,
come from the time that there was no AA.
uh,
And and so people did have to change tires and they didn't like it at all. But I can see also that when you've got a flat tire, even when you're calling AA, you're not cool and comfortable. That you
no,
get
yeah,
uptight and upset. And so you're
yeah, for
looking for
sure.
help. Hmm?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. How about getting stopped by the cops?
Well, that's even worse. But I feel
That's
like the best strategy I found to when you get stopped by the cops is to just stay relaxed. Because if you stay cool and relaxed, they'll leave you alone. They're more likely
Mhm.
to leave you alone. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you don't like what they're doing, if you argue with them, if you resist them in any way, you're creating heat for yourself and creating heat for them.
Yeah.
And if you create heat for them, they're going to give you some heat back.
Right.
So this is many, many places where we can see that. When we have an interview with the boss, maybe an interview for a new job, the best way to handle it is when we're really cool. And so we have to practice being cool under pressure. Now, this is an important point to remember to practice being cool when you're under pressure. That, in fact, in physics, heat and pressure go together. That if you heat up, if you put, let us say you've got an air pump and you've got an air uh, cylinder, and you pump that up, pump air and put it under pressure, that's going to get hot. You've all seen aerosol cans. What happens when you release the pressure by spraying something out of an aerosol can? Doesn't it get cool again? Right. Okay, so I'm now pointing at something about that if you can be cool under pressure, then when you take the pressure off, you get a whole lot more cool. There are training things that they do in sports. One of the examples is runners will wear ankle bracelets that are full of sandbags to make their legs heavier, or that tennis players will put on bracelets on their wrist that have weights on them, because they've already practiced without those weights and they've gotten a certain amount of strength and a certain amount of speed. You put those heavy weights on, and now they're slower, and now they don't have the power, and so now they have to practice getting that power and gaining that speed. Why? Because then at the game time, they take those heavy arm bracelets, wrist bracelets off, and now they're even more strong with their swing and more fast. Is that not true, Scott? You've been into sports quite a bit, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I never played that sport, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, for a swimmer, for instance, swimming in a heavy suit.
Yeah, that can be a good workout. Sometimes they'll have the resistance bungees. It's like a elastic cable that they
Mm-hmm.
attach to their waist, and you have to swim to the other side with the bungee pulling you back, so you're
Mm-hmm.
stretching the cord all the way, so you're like you have to really sprint.
Exactly. So those are artificial kinds of training tools, but you can see all of the pressures that you have all day long, no matter what it is. Your dealings with other people, having to wait in line at the bank, or any of that kind of stuff. Begin to see that this is the time to practice anapanasati. Start practicing when you're under pressure. If you can remain cool under pressure, then when you go back into seclusion, then you're even more cool. This is the way that we see the real practice of nibbana is by learning how to be cool when we're under pressure, so that when we leave the pressure and let that go, we really get cool. So, does anybody have any questions about this?
I kind of have a weird thing where it's like it's almost easier for me sometimes, it seems, to be cool under pressure because then it is in seclusion, because when I'm under pressure, it feels like the moment is demanding me to be fully present and cool and like aware of what's going on. But if I'm in seclusion and I have no other I have nothing to sort of occupy my mind, or like there's no task at hand, then it's seems like it's more difficult to deal with. Like for me, it's easier to deal with now, at least difficult people, than it is just like difficult mental states. Well, when you're completely alone and there's no other stimulus. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that would mean then that it's valuable to practice when we're under pressure, and then it's valuable to practice when we're not under pressure, when it's easy to practice, because in those times the mind is easily wanders away. And we often mistake things. In fact, several times I've talked with people about, one of them had the issue that he kept asking me questions. I kept saying the same thing over and over again, is just when the mind wanders away, just keep coming back into the wholesome state. And the many questions that he had, eventually he got around to saying, well, I'm trying to get it right. I want to understand. Well, what that means, wanting to understand, is a normal human thing. We are taught. There's an instinctual level in there, in the sense that if you're not paying attention, that a predator can sneak up on you. You got to know what things are happening. But in our society, that preservation instinct has been diverted into, you got to know everything. You got to go to school. You got to learn your ABCs. You got to learn your 1, 2, 3s. Why should I learn to read? Because then I can read all the stuff that's going to make me safe, so they say. And what happens is that we gain a kind of a thirst for knowledge. How many of you have that thirst for knowledge? You got to know. You want to understand. Everybody, right? How about you, Carl? You have that thirst. You got to know. You got to understand. But guess what? That is kind of a heat. That's hot. Wanting to know something that you don't know is hot. Just like wanting something that you don't have is hot. Wanting knowledge that you don't have is hot. So how do we deal with that? Take the pressure off right then and there. I don't have to know that in order to be happy right now. In other words, you don't even have to know how to practice correctly in order to just practice correctly. Most people want to know how to practice correctly, and so they worry, they fret, they fart, they doubt, they ask a lot of questions, and as they do, they make themselves hot by wanting to know how to be cool. And the easy answer to that is, you don't have to know everything. All you need to know is just enough. Just enough to see that I'm asking a lot of questions here when I could just be cool instead. So I can just cool off intentionally without getting answers to all my questions. And that takes care of quite a lot of the, let us say, the hindrances to actually correct practice, is having a lot of questions about how to practice, worrying, fretting over it, trying to get something. A lot of people have trouble correctly practicing by wanting to get results from their practice, rather than recognizing that just being cool right now is the result. You get the benefit immediately. But many people say, oh, I got to practice hard and get work done, and then eventually I'll have some benefit from my meditation practice. Or in fact, all the benefits are immediate, as well as a residual side effect of skill development. If I can handle this situation and handle it well, then I can handle a little bit of tougher situation and handle it well, and get ready to handle a really, really tough situation, like being in court, and handle that well. And then a bigger deal like that, like being on your own deathbed. How are you going to handle that? And then dying itself. That's heavy duty for most people. Can you be cool? Because if you can be cool while you're dying, then what else is important enough to get hot over? So this is the way that we begin to practice. Anytime that you find yourself under stress or under tension or worried about something, or if people are hassling you and you see the situation is tough, that's the time to practice. When you're sick, that's the time to practice. So, what would you say to yourself while you're sick? Marcus, what would you say to yourself when you're sick? Because you get sick from time to time, right? What are you going to tell yourself? Oh,
Well,
poor me. Oh, I'm sick. Oh, I don't feel good. Oh, this is not good. Maybe I'll be sick for the rest of my life. Maybe I should go to a doctor, and we get into all of these doubts and frustrations and worries. And the right way to practice is, oh, the body's sick, but I'm not sick. I can handle this. That in fact, if I have good thoughts, I'll help the body get better. That I'm okay here. And we continue to operate that way, giving ourselves wholesome thoughts. Oh, I'll be better tomorrow. Oh, I'm going to be just fine. Let me take a few deep breaths and just relax and enjoy being sick. Yeah, Carl. Go ahead.
I'll probably go back and say when you worry and when you have all these trying to like solve the issue at hand with more problem solving. For example, if you have like a task at work and you're stuck at it and you keep thinking about it and you can't find the solution and you create more friction and friction, and then you take your mind off it, you go for a walk, and then the solution magically appears to the problem as soon as you take your mind off it. Like everything just smoothens itself out. That's how I like see it. It's just relaxing into it. Whenever you notice that friction, that means that there needs to be a cooling down period, right?
Yes, exactly. It's well known in the scientific community where the scientists are doing experiments and they're not getting the results that they would expect, in the sense that they're trying to prove something that they already know is true, already know is real, but they can't make it true because of their experiments, equipment or something is not correct or whatever like that. And they'll klutz and finagle and work at it. Einstein even talks about that the math just wasn't right. It just didn't fit. And then he gets tired and then disgusted and he leaves it. And he goes away and gets it off his mind and cools off. And then the solution will pop up.
I guess the second part would be for most people it's incomprehensible. How can you not think about the problem and it can come to solve itself? I have to think about it. I have to find the way, I
I'm
have to fill
worried.
in that key. Yeah, yeah.
I'm hot. That in fact, I'm afraid. I'm afraid. That's what causes all of this. The ultimate underlying cause of all frictions, all dukkha, is uh, fear, and that the scientist is afraid that he can't get it. But when he goes and cools off, the solution will come to him. I've seen that happen also in code. That you just keep working on that code and keep working, you get frustrated and you can't get it right and you don't know how to do the syntax and all of that kind of stuff, and you walk away from it, and then, I know what to do. So when we're hot, we can't think straight. That in fact, when people get really hot, it's obvious that they really can't think straight. This is why, for instance, boxing, the opponent wants to get in the face of their other opponent and make him angry, make him hot. Right before the match starts, get him hot. Because if you can get him hot and worried, then he's not paying attention very well. But if you're cool, even under fire, even if he just hits you in the face and you just got really hot, cool off. So a major quality of any sport is can you cool off in the face of heat? The way that we do this is obviously in Anapanasati, we get into seclusion and learn how to get ourselves cool. And then we start applying that when we're hot. We have to learn to cool off when we're under pressure so that we can perform well. Another example of this is in debate, where they have the concept, it's almost a rule, of no ad hominem attacks. Now, what an ad hominem attack is that you're attacking your debate opponent, not his subject. That in fact, in debates, people learn to debate both sides, which means they're not really attached to one side or the other. And so people can stay cool a bit in a debate until you attack him personally, and then he gets hot, and then he can't perform. And so the real point that we're talking about here is, can you remain cool under pressure? The answer to that is, you got to practice being cool so that then you can practice being cool under pressure. And then when the pressure is off, you can really go into the freezer. You can really cool off that way. And so
But as
this is
Scott
what.
mentioned,
Go ahead.
as Scott mentioned, like it's for me sometimes it's also easier to see if the fire is almost like outside of you. If the fire is burning, like if you see somebody else on fire, you can be like, I'm gonna be the highlight. But then when the fire is starting almost in your own house, it takes a while until you smell the smoke, until you see the flames coming out. It takes a while to see your own smoke, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it so easier to see somebody else's smoke, but it's really difficult to see your own smoke sometimes?
That's exactly right. This is part of our training in waking up so that we can see when we're just getting a little bit hot. Because it's a whole lot easier to cool off when we're a little bit hot than to cool off when we've gotten really hot. And so maintaining our cool and being really cool is the practice. And a lot of people think that, oh, it's all about just sitting in meditation, and that's how I'm going to get cooled off so that I can handle hot times. And the answer to that is no. The way to handle hot times is by practicing being cool in those hot times. Practice being cool in the hot times, just like the weight on the tennis player, and then you get really cool when you don't have any pressure. That you relieve the pressure, and then, in fact, some aerosol cans can actually start creating, getting a little bit of ice, a little frost. That's the word I'm looking for. Frost will get on the can. Okay, can you start being frosty? Can you practice being frosty, being cool, as if the pressure had just been released? This is an example of how to practice. When we are sick, we're automatically hot. The question is, can you get frosty when you're sick? Can you really cool off? Oh, this is okay. Got no problems with that. What a relief it is. So, Anna, do you have anything to say? She's gone. Amit, how about you? You asked this question. Are we getting into Nibbana for you?
Yes, I am getting some understanding of Nibbana, and I don't have a question yet, but maybe later.
Okay. Scott, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, the staying cool, like the literal temperature as can you elaborate what that means? What does it mean to be cool? Like I know it's a analogy to use temperature, but I'm assuming you're talking about the feelings and when
Emotional
something
cool.
is cool, it means it's not as agitated or active. When some like if you heat up gas, the molecules will be bumping off each other really fast. But if it cools down to uh, a less energized state, then it's not really moving. But
Right.
yeah, what so like, can you talk about that?
Well, in the physical world, when you put something under pressure, which means that you pack more of it into a smaller space, whether it's air or nitrogen or whatever like that, that it does heat up because the molecules are rubbing up against each other. They're active. This happens in human society when people get under pressure. They start bouncing around in their own mind. They get agitated, and that agitation then is easy to rub off onto other people. That in fact, it's really easy for them under pressure to get agitated and get hot also. And so with the air, they try to get it as cool as they can when they pump it under pressure, but it still gets really, really hot. But then when it's under pressure over time, that air tank will get back to room temperature, just like the canister, the aerosol can will go back to room temperature because of the dissipation of the heat, though it's still under pressure. So when you let that pressure off, the temperature will go down. And this is exactly that analogy that we're using for emotions, is that we can, in fact, when we take the pressure off, we automatically cool off. But if we can remain cool under pressure, then when the pressure is released, we get a whole lot more cool. What a relief it is to not be under pressure. Go ahead,
I guess
Scott.
the skill of being able to do that, because sometimes it feels very obvious and natural how to relax and just, take a deep breath and then release whatever tensions you're holding on in your mind and your body. And it feels like, oh, of course, yeah, just relax, do that. But then other times it can kind of seem a little bit more confusing, especially if you're trying too hard to relax, then you're getting you're not relaxing because you're trying to relax.
Because you're
You know what I
trying
mean?
to relax. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of friction, a lot of pressure. Right. So, Amit, you got your
Yeah,
hand up. Go ahead.
I have one thought actually. Um, last time we were discussing about the perception, right? And you were saying the brain is processing information. We get a little bit of data and then we process it a lot. And I'm wondering if this is related. So more we process, more heat we generate. And then to cool off cool off would mean is not to process much, but just to keep getting more and more input data.
Yes, in fact, that's correct. Is that by, as we had talked before, that you're mentioning, that when we get a little bit of data and we're not really understanding or what it is, we start to perceive, we start to make stuff up, we start telling ourselves stories, we start trying to figure it out or gain a conclusion to it. And we almost always use old data, old Sankara, old memories that probably have some heat built into them. And so we make ourselves hot by trying to become cool. We're trying to understand. We get hot when we don't understand something, rather than recognizing just because I don't understand it doesn't make me have to be hot. That is okay. I can practice correctly. I can cool off even if I don't know. But in our society, we don't talk that way. We're taught that, oh, you can only cool off after you figure it out. And then you don't figure it out, you just stay hot. So if we can, in fact, just cool off and take in more data, the new data may be part of the solution to it. But getting hot and trying to worry about what it is not the solution. that in fact we often prevent ourselves from gaining the solution by worrying about it. That we don't come up with a solution when we're worried, we actually come up with a solution when we're cool. And so we have to practice being cool. Now, when we are sitting alone and practicing Anapanasati, thoughts will come up. Those thoughts will be hot. All the hot stuff is what's going to come up out of the sankara. All the problems, all the worries, all of that kind of stuff is right there on the surface, and it's going to bubble up. So this is the time, again, to practice correctly by cooling off intentionally, by giving ourselves the right kind of language. I don't need to know that. We're okay. We're not in a hurry with this project. I'll get it done tomorrow. There is no worries. And we just talk ourselves into getting cool again. Just cool off. This is what Nibbana is about. It's not some high city, or it's not after death. It is not, in fact, got very little to do with physical temperature that can be registered or calibrated by a thermometer. Rather, it's emotional. And we can learn to cool off by caulking ourselves, giving ourselves cool thoughts to think rather than hot thoughts to think. And so we can cool off even more in seclusion. We can get really, really cool by being alone. And when I say being alone, I mean really alone in the sense of being isolated from all the cares and all the worries of the world. There was a guy who owned an aircraft company and a whole lot of other companies. His name was Howard Hughes. And he got so hot he could not stand being around anyone, and so he secluded himself in the penthouse of one of the hotels that he owned in Las Vegas, just to get away from everybody, to get away from it all. But he really wasn't in seclusion at all because he still had to worry and fret over the companies that he owned. So when I'm talking about being cool, that means get away from your own business. Getting away from everything. Don't bring anything in that's going to make you hot. And so anything that you do think about, just let it go. Throw it out. Only when you come to almost a vacuum are things going to get really cool. And so let yourself go down to the point of having only wholesome thoughts. And those wholesome thoughts in this case would be cool thoughts, having really cool thoughts. Like, wow, this is cool. First thing that Scott said, yeah, cool. So think about coolness. Think about being cool. Think about that there is nothing that's going to make you hot, that you got everything handled, that you can live a cool life. This is what Nibbana means. It means being cool. In the time of the Buddha, the word Nibbana was actually used quite often. It was an ordinary word that ordinary people used. But now, in Western society and speaking English, we hear the word Nibbana or Nirvana, and we think of it as something foreign, something strange, something unique, something weird, something way out there. But in our language, we talk about being cool all the time. When somebody's hot, what do we tell them? We tell them to cool off, to cool down. In Thai language, they have the word chai yen. Yen is the word for cool, and jai is the word for hot. Cool off your heart. Cool down. So you think about that word. Put that word cool into your noble conversation of wholesome thoughts. This is a way of gladdening the mind, is by cooling the mind, intentionally cooling off. No worries, no problems, everything is cool. This is the right way to practice. And the time to practice is when we need it most, when we're hot, when we're worried, when we're bothered. Remember to cool off. When we're in trouble, when we're dealing with the hot world, that's the time to practice, to remember to cool off. It's a very simple process. It's very easy. If you can remember. Can you remember to be cool? Marcus, can you remember to be cool? When things get hot, can you be cool? Ahmed, can you remember that when things get hot, when things get tough, you can remember to become cool, to have
Yes,
cool thoughts?
practice.
How cool
Yes,
can
with
you
the
be?
practice study.
Go ahead, I'm listening.
I just said with a repeated practice, when things are not hot, I think I can also learn to remember to cool when things are hot.
Mm-hmm. Pedro, can you remember to be cool? He's got his
Well,
mic on. Yeah.
You reminded me to be cool for all the call, so now I will try to remember it myself.
Ah, great. Okay. So, does anybody have anything else to add to this?
I just
No.
wanted to maybe say I find it useful. You use a lot of words as cool, and you add a lot of emotion and visual aspect to it. I found myself to be the most coolest in heated situations is when I could also imagine that coolness is to put it into a complete thing, because we hear this a lot of times, like if you get into argument, hey man, cool down, but that doesn't really do much for a person saying cool down. You have to really have almost like a visual aspect of getting a nice little breeze cooling your body down, that's why I kind of relate to like this
All right.
heaviness of the words as well.
So, taking yourself out of the oven of life would be cooling off. That's how the word was used in the time of the Buddha, that when something comes like cooking food, when food is really hot, it's delicious, but it'll burn your tongue. You got to let it cool off a little bit. So this is what we're talking about. That's the word, the way that nirvana was used. Also, domesticated animals are cool, as opposed to wild animals are hot. So the word wild actually means things are hot. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talked about that in the sense of there was an old talk that he gave that is still around. I think it's in English, and it has forest monks, wild monks. Can you get out in the forest, live in the forest as a wild monk, and still be cool? Not wild in the sense of wild animals and predators and prey and all of that, but just be wild in the sense of taking the forms off, taking the structure away, and become wild, but do it in a really cool way. Like dogs. They bark when they don't know somebody, but when they do know somebody, they'll cool off and they stop barking. So this is the way that we're going to practice, is to practice cool. All right, guys. Well, I think that this has been a good talk. What do you think? Cool, huh?
Pretty cool.
Yeah, cool talk about being cool. All right. Well, I really appreciate you all showing up, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dhammarato.
See you guys. See you, Marcus.
See you.